Good afternoon. I'm so used to saying morning. Welcome to History with R&R Live. With me, as always, Jeff Franklin. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Traveling through history here.
Yeah. We're gonna touch on a topic that,
Kind of ironic.
yeah, it's a little, it's a tad. Just a little bit of a heads up. Just kind of some housekeeping. Tomorrow morning, the round table that was supposed to drop last Friday will be out tomorrow morning, so do catch that. It should be dropping about 7 o'clock. I wasn't feeling very well last week, so I didn't get anything done. So my apologies, but it will be out tomorrow morning. I finished up the editing this morning. And so to bring in our guest and talk about this, we'll bring in Conti. Welcome, sir.
Hello,
Or
everybody.
ma'am. Sorry, I'm still getting used to things, and I'm not awake yet.
Don't worry, I've been called far worse.
Yeah, that's what I always say. I've been called worse by better, you motherfucker.
Welcome. Welcome, Naomi.
Conti,
All right, so today's before I get to today's topic, rude of me, I'm failing at my job already. Welcome, John DeMarco, Zax. Welcome, sir. Hopefully, you don't live anywhere near those rivers because they're gonna flood like a bastard this spring. Gorilla's Random Thoughts. Welcome, James. Welcome, Clawbird, and I think I got everybody. Okay. Oh, Darius. Welcome. All right, so today's topic is what happens when you're an idiot and you invade Russia without planning for it and forgetting there's something called a winter. In other words, Barbarossa.
As the old saying goes, nobody invades Russia. Russia invades you.
Yeah,
but
well, we could make a joke, but it's too soon.
Well, yeah, unless of course Ukraine. You know, what's going on right now, it kind of reminds me in the UK, it kind of reminds me of the old Asterix and Obelix cartoons when I was growing up. You know, they had legions of Romans trying to invade this small area of Gaul, and they're just kicking all the Romans out again. But yes, today we're going to be talking about Operation Barbarossa, where Hitler failed, where Napoleon also failed. It was one of the largest invasions in history. The amount of forces that were expended to get into Russia and get close to Moscow as well. They got very close. They were only anywhere from 14 to 18 miles out. One general, or I think it was a lieutenant colonel general, swore he could see the tops of the Kremlin. Unfortunately, that most people think that's pretty much a lie, because the older buildings were shorter in the center, and the newer buildings were taller on the outside. So the Kremlin would have been hard to see around this, the outer ring of the city of Moscow. So. Yeah,
the only difference between him and Napoleon was Napoleon actually took Moscow.
There was atmospheric distortion, and bent to light waves. So, there you go.
Didn't hold it very long though. I said the Russians.
No. But he did take Moscow. But unfortunately, then winter kicked in. Which, if this sounds familiar,
yes, the Russian winters. I mean, especially around Siberia area, it goes well below minus 10 degrees Celsius. It gets really cold. That's why. I mean, if you watch that movie, what was it? Enemy at the Gates. You saw the snipers out there in the Russian winters hiding. They weren't. They would have pulled back, gone to somewhere where they can actually make fires without getting caught by a sniper, and then pull away. And then sort of get back to it the next day, see if they can find anyone. But but Russian winters are some of the coldest. In fact, that's why they invented vodka. But let's bring up. Where did I put it now? I've lost it. Here it is. Okay. So
I think you lost it a long time ago.
Co-stars a show with you. I wonder why.
Oh, yes. Well, yeah.
Oops.
Well, there will be a few new surprises in the next season, so yeah. But anyway, today we'll talk about Operation Barbarossa, and so yeah. So Hitler and his generals originally scheduled the invasion of the USSR for mid-May 1941. However, the unforeseen, shall we say, necessity of invading Yugoslavia and Greece in April that year forced them to postpone the Soviet campaign to late June. And because at the time Hitler took the Balkans pretty easily. It was pretty swift, so they were able to sort of revamp their timetable, right? But there was a sort of a 5-week delay for carrying out the invasion of the USSR, and was to prove more serious because in 1941 Russian winters would arrive earlier than usual. However, Hitler and his head honchos, or the Oberkommando des Heeres, the OKH, or the German Army High Command, namely the Army Commander-in-Chief Walter von Brauch, Walter von Brauchitsch. There we go. And he was an Army General Chief of Staff, as well as Franz Halder. They were convinced that the Russian army would be defeated in 2 or 3 months, and by the end of October, the Germans would have had conquered all of Europe. All the European part of Russia, like the Ukraine. And obviously, we're seeing how even a modern army like the Russians are having problems with the Ukraine.
But,
So
I will point out, Barbarossa, on paper, might have worked. There were a few problems. When I was growing up, it was always pointed out the Russian winter. If you follow modern history now, it's changed from that to oil. The problem is it was a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, a little bit of column C, and a little bit of column D. Unfortunately, in the modern look of it, it's one thing or another. Can't be a multiple. The main cause was oil. Well, yeah, and that's why in 43 he went for the caucus.
Well, they did want the Hitler. I mean, Germany, even after Hitler took power, and they were still suffering a lot, And what they need, we said, we need breathing room and growing space, But he sort of took that a bit too far. But they did start venturing into Russia with 3, not legions. What's the word? I think it was divisions, spearheads. You had the north, center, and south. So they went into 3 different directions, trying and sort of, whilst not quite a pincer movement, but also coming through the middle as well. And they got, as I say, they got through most of the Russian territories very quickly.
Yeah.
Until just short of just short of Moscow, and that's when they really.
Moscow, yeah.
That's when they really started.
For the most part, right up until the day that the Germans invaded, Stalin would throw out any report that they were going to invade, because for the longest time his secret police and such had been telling him they're going to invade on Tuesday. Tuesday would come and go. They're going to invade on Thursday. Well, Thursday would come and go. The other thing was Stalin firmly believed that the mistake of World War I would not be done. There would not be a war on 2 fronts. So they would not invade Russia until after Britain fell, because there wouldn't be a war on 2 fronts.
And because they didn't expect it, because obviously they believed, that was going to be, that was the perfect opportunity for the Germans to make that move.
Yeah.
However, and even at that point, the Russians, although they had the numbers in the form of equipment and tactics, they were well behind They were well behind the Germans. In fact, when it came to military technology, the Germans were way ahead of everyone else because they were one of the first to have an actual military, an industrial military complex. Where everyone else is sort of, didn't. I mean, they had factories, but was nowhere on the same scale as what the Germans were doing at the time. So the invasion of the Soviet Union, which was originally given the code name Operation Fritz, but as preparations began, Hitler renamed it to Operation Barbarossa after the Holy Roman Empire Frederick Barbarossa. So yeah, but for the campaign against the Soviet Union, the Germans allotted almost about 150 divisions. 150 divisions in the. I mean, I worked. I was stationed in a divisional headquarters, as well as I also worked in a brigade in my military career. And we the British military only had, like, at the time, 3 divisions. And a division is massive. But so 150 divisions that's a lot of manpower. That's hundreds of thousands of men. Well, I won't say hundreds of thousands of men, but that's in the tens of thousands of men. And that is a lot of manpower. So they had 150 divisions, and they were comprised of about comprised about 3 million men, and among those were 19 Panzer divisions. So that's an armored division. Yes, 19 armored divisions, and in the total Barbarossa force, there was 3,000 tanks, 7,000 artillery pieces, and 2,500 aircraft. At least that's what. That's the most. That's what most most people are saying. I don't know how accurate it is. I think they might have had a rough number and they just sort of rounded it up. Because I mean, how do you account for 7,000 artillery pieces? I'm not sure. I don't know if anyone actually counted them out. Because I know most soldiers, they don't count the rounds, especially bullets. So I don't think they're going to count the artillery pieces. But yeah, it was the most powerful invasion force in human history. The German strength was further increased by another 30 divisions, comprising of, I think, Romanians, Finnish, and
Italy.
I think that's it. Actually, Finnish and Romanians.
Italy
As well.
Came in.
So, although, as I said, the Soviet had the manpower. They had
they were there.
3 times the number of manpower of both tanks and aircraft as the Germans had, but the aircraft were also obsolete as well. So the Soviet tanks were about equal to those of the Germans. However, a greater hindrance to Hitler's chance of victory was that the German intelligence service underestimated the troop reserves that Stalin could bring up from the depths of the USSR, and he did bring in, I think it was from Siberia, especially when the winter came in. Because the Siberians were used to this kind of weather, as that part of the USSR. So so they were used to living and operating in that kind of weather, where the Germans weren't. So yeah, and also their the Germans' logistics as well suffered heavily. They were waiting. There was a point where they were waiting on resupplies that were never coming.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't get there.
Well, the other thing with Barbarossa that a lot of people don't take into consideration is Barbarossa happens, the invasion comes in, the initial forces that the Germans reach are really like they're not facing T-34s right out of the gate. T-34s don't really come into effect until later on. Not only that, but the heavy tanks don't come in until later on. They do face them, but nowhere near the numbers they would later on. Mainly, they're facing the tanks that just don't have a hope in Hades of being able to compete with the Germans. The T-34 doesn't come in until much later in the battle. And then not only that, but there is an event that happens right before Barbarossa happens that really reshapes everything, that allows the Siberian troops to be brought to the front line. And that is unequivocally that Japan signs a armistice with Russia. Before Barbarossa, Japan was still technically at war with Russia. They were
I
still
never
having
knew.
skirmishes up in the Siberian, up on the Chinese border with the Russian troops. But right before Barbarossa, Japan signed an armistice with Russia. We won't attack you, you don't attack us. That freed up all the troops that Russia had on that border to come and face the Germans.
I never knew that the Japanese had actually
Yeah.
engaged conflict
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
Russians.
Well,
I knew they did with
it showed you just how much the Axis powers talk to each other. Yes, I'm about to invade Russia. Okay, well, we just signed a peace treaty with them. Thanks, jackass. And that happened a lot. Like Barbarossa, Mussolini didn't know about it until like 3 days later.
Wow. I mean, I
Because
knew
they didn't
the
talk.
Japanese.
They didn't tell each other what the hell they were doing. So
Well, I knew the Japanese and Americans had engaged, and that part of the war went on after VE Day.
Yeah.
But I never knew that. I never knew that Japan and Russia
they had
had
signed a
engaged with them.
non-aggression pact
I'm gonna have
right
to look that
before
up.
Barbarossa, which freed up a whole bunch of troops on that Chinese border.
Okay.
That
Because
normally Stalin had a whole bunch of troops in reserve in case the Japanese came up, because they had bickered back and forth, and then they signed the pact in Moscow with the Japanese, freeing up all those divisions to come the other way. Yeah, but it's not one of the more highlighted parts of the war, because the Russians were on our side and we were against the Japanese, but they had technically a peace treaty that they didn't break until after the fall of Germany.
I just looked that up. It was signed on April 13th of 41.
Yeah.
I'll have to look it up because when I was reading up on Barbarossa, there was no mention of that the Russians or the Japanese.
It's one of those things that get covered under forgotten wars, forgotten parts of the war, because it's not brought up. You hear about Churchill getting drunk in Moscow, but you don't hear too much about the reason. One of the reasons that Germany felt that they were okay and they weren't, why they were so shocked that those troops were on that line, was they weren't accounting for them, because they expected them to be holding position in case the Japanese came up, but the Japanese took themselves out of the fight, and therefore freed up a whole bunch of divisions to roll the other way.
Well, I didn't. Wow. I mean, I knew. Well, like I said, I never knew that the
And then Russia doesn't invade Japan until right before the A-bomb.
Wow. Oh, yeah. I've dropped my mouse. Sorry. So where we are? I thought I broke my mouse. Okay, so here we are. Back to my notes. So as I said, yeah, there were. So German friendship was launched by 3 army groups under the same commanders as in the invasion of France back in 1940. On the left or north, an army group under General Wilhelm von Leip, who struck from eastern Prussia, or what was Prussia, into the Baltic states of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. And St. Petersburg had well, say, had suffered a lot of heavy casualties. It was, from what I'm told, it was actually more bloody than the Somme. And up until reading this, I actually thought the Somme was the bloodiest in human history, but apparently not. On the right, of course, south, another army group under General Geert von Rundstedt, and another group under General Paul Ludwig von Kleist. They advanced from southern Poland into Ukraine against Kiev. Once it was to wheel southeastward to the coast of the Black Sea and to the Sea of Azov, if I pronounce that right, or Azov, or Azov, depends how you want to pronounce it. I'm not Russian, so I'm going to say Azov. And the last in the center was the north of the Pripyat marshes. The main blow was delivered by General Fyodor von Bock. His army group, one army group under General Heinz Guderian and another under General Hermann Hoth, thrusting northwards to the Smolensk and forward at Smolensk and Moscow. So while the other one was sort of, I think, coming in from the north and the south, and they sort of spread out, and then I think the idea was to come in and then come in like an arrowhead formation, sort of coming to Moscow. The invasion was a long 1,800 mile or 2,900 kilometers front. It took the Soviet leadership completely by surprise and caught the Red Army in an unprepared and partially demobilized state. As part of the southern flank of Bock's group, Guderian's tanks raced 50 miles at 80 kilometers beyond the frontier of the first day of the invasion, and were at Minsk, which was 200 miles beyond 200 miles beyond it on June 27th. Sorry, I can't even read my own notes. At Minsk, first day of the invasion, and we're at Minsk, which was 200 miles beyond it on June 27th. And at Minsk, they converged with Hoth's tanks, which had attacked from the northern flank, but Bock's infantry could not follow up quickly enough to complete the encirclement of the Soviet troops in that area. Though 300,000 prisoners were taken in the salient, a large part of the Soviet forces were able to escape to the east. So yeah, the Soviet armies were clumsily handled and frittered their tank strength away in piecemeal action like that of the French in 1940. But yeah, the isolated Soviet troops fought with a stubbornness that the French had not shown, and their resistance imposed a break by continuing to block road centers long after the German tide had swept past them. You know, when I'm reading through this again, this actually sounds like a lot like what's happening in the Ukraine right now.
Yeah. But the other thing that a lot of people overlook as well when they see this the shift from when Germany is invading and winning to when Germany is on the retreat. And the one part that gets overlooked is look at the command structure of the Russian military when they're losing compared to when they're winning. There's a major shift that happens. When Barbarossa is launched, the Russian military went through one of its nice little purges when Stalin decided that certain generals and commanders were getting too big for their britches and needed to go to the Huskow or needed to get shot. And you know, and then what he does, because he was always afraid of a military coup against him.
Yeah, of course.
So no military leader could get too much power. So what they needed to do is they needed commissaires embedded with the troops. And a commissaire could override the general because he was there to ensure that the party line was towed. So the problem with that was a commissaire had jack shit knowledge about what was needed on the battlefield. The general,
he was to make sure the general was.
So it would be like having a politician in the war room on the ground. Doesn't work.
No,
And
no, it doesn't.
what the change was is Stalin pulled back all of the commissaires and gave the power back to the generals. And then they started going the other way.
I thought you were going to say that when you said the generals get too big for the britches, essentially that they become complacent and so they stopped really performing the way they should have. And I can imagine, but obviously some of them would have been made an example of to sort of motivate the rest of the generals and the troops to start winning.
Well, there's another little known fact that pre Barbarossa, the Russians had a jet fighter program. The reason that they didn't have jet fighters during World War II was because Stalin sent them all to Siberia. All of the leading scientists that were in charge of that program pissed Stalin off for one reason or another, and they all got sent to Siberia, or shot.
Well,
And
a lot of them. I mean,
that tends to stifle your jet program.
Go figure.
I mean, though a lot of countries were still struggling with the jet. I mean, the jet engine that was designed in Britain was invented by I think it was an RAF engineer. It was a sergeant and it was an engineer of some sort. He said, "Look, here's a jet engine," and the RAF just went, "We're never going to use it. We've got propellers," and but even then, the jet engine, when it comes to the German sort of jets and rocket propulsion systems, everyone else was still way behind. When it came to that technology, I think a lot of it had to be stolen. I mean, you take the first. I can't remember what plane it was, but it was just. I think it was just after the war, and the Americans had one of their first jet fighters, proper jet fighters, and they sent off. Sorry, getting off topic here, but they sent off like a small wing to go meet these Russians because they knew these Russian planes were coming. And when they saw them, they realized that they were looking at the exact same plane. The Russians had the exact same plane. And nobody knows who stole the technology from who. Did the Americans steal it from the Russians? Did the Russians steal it from the...
Neither, actually.
From the Americans?
But they both stole it from the same source. But the funny part, and Mountains brings it up, Stalin did pull back the commissaires, and then he set his generals against each other. During this part of World War II, it was very commonplace where if you were a Russian general and you screwed up, the way you were relieved from duty was you were shot, and then your replacement took over.
Well, the Russians were always happy to shoot someone. I mean, even their training exercises, they still do it today. I mean, we did live firing training exercises, but we were firing at targets. Or even if we're doing a section attack or with live ammunition, we always made sure that the round, if the machine gunners made sure that the rounds are going over the heads of the rest of the section or the rest of the troop, and obviously those who are advancing forward are firing at targets. Now the Russians didn't do this. The Russians would have two troops fight each other with live ammunition, and essentially it was like a game of dodgeball. If you saw a guy get hit, it would motivate you to fight harder and push harder forward, so you can then take obviously the opposition's area. It'll motivate you not to get hit yourself. But the Russians always used live ammunition in these sorts of exercises. So I always found it quite remarkable how they actually had any troops after basic training, which was bizarre. But yeah, so where was I? I've lost my place now. So yeah, the Soviet armies were read that part. Hold on. The result was similar when the Guderian's tanks, having crossed the Dnieper River on July 10th, entered Smolensk 6 days later and converged with Hoth's thrust through, and now forgive me if I don't pronounce it, Vitebsk. I can't remember. And it was 200,000 Soviet prisoners were taken. But from Soviet forces were withdrawn from the trap to the line of the Desna, and a large pocket of resistance lay behind the German armor. So now the Germans were slowly being surrounded. By mid-July, moreover, the series of rainstorms were turning the ground into slush and mud. And I don't know if anyone in the audience has ever been in the military, but typically this is round about the time, sergeant majors and squadron commanders decide that this is a good time to go on maneuvers for 3-4 weeks, and sometimes a truck will get caught in this kind of sludge, and yeah, it's not funny. It really isn't funny having to dig out anywhere from a 9 to 14-ton truck out of the sludge. But yeah, it does put a spanner in the works. These series of rains were turning the sandy Russian roads into clogging mud, over which the wheeled vehicles of the German transport behind the tanks could make only very slow progress. No doubt because they were getting stuck, and the soldiers had to dig out the truck again. Because I don't know if the German trucks were 4-wheel drive. I don't think they were. But the Germans also began to be hampered by the scorched earth policy adopted by the retreating Soviets. Soviet troops burned crops, destroyed bridges, and evacuated factories in the face of the German advance. So essentially, they were making sure that the Germans couldn't utilize any of the resources that might have been left behind, as of the surrounding areas of the lands of the area that were taken. So the Russians just they just destroyed it all as sort of a FU, and so it made it a lot harder for the Germans to be resupplied. So what was I going to say? So entire steel and munition plants in the westernmost portions of the USSR were dismantled and shipped by rail to the east, where they were put back into production. The Soviets were also destroyed evacuated most of their rolling stock, i.e., railroad cars. That way, they would deprive the Germans of the use of the Soviet rail system, since the Soviet railroad track was of a gauge different from a German track, and German rolling stock was consequently useless on it. So they couldn't have the road trains come down and use those railroads. They had to specifically be Russian rail cars or nothing. Which
But I do want to just touch on something that you mentioned that is one of the unmentioned really marvels of World War II, and that was the moving of the factories, because they were right in originally they were right, like technically the Germans took over all the land that those factories were on, but they moved them, and they didn't just move the supply, they moved the damn buildings and the people and everything far behind the lines, reset them up in times that we wouldn't be able to do today because, well, unions exist. And
what is union?
and rebuilt the factories and had them pumping out tanks.
The communist USSR only had one union, and that was the state. Everyone else was, yes, you are under the union, but you're on your own. You will do as we tell you, or we'll make you.
You'll do as you're told or die.
Or you end up in a gulag for disobeying the state, which was funny, but not really. But yeah,
I wouldn't say that's funny.
No. By mid-July, the Germans advanced more than 400 miles, or 640 kilometers, and were only 200 miles from Moscow. They still had ample time to make decisive gains before the onset of the winter, but they lost the opportunity primarily because of the arguments throughout August between Hitler and the OKH. about the destination of the next thrust of the next thrust stance. Whereas the OKH proposed Moscow as the main objective, Hitler actually wanted a major effort to be directed southeastward through Ukraine and the Donetsk Basin. I keep saying Donetsk Basin. The the Donetsk Basin into the Caucasus.
Into the Caucasus, because he wanted the oil.
But with a minor swing northwestward against Leningrad to converge with Lieb's army group. However, in the Ukraine, Rundstedt and Kleist had made short work of the foremost Soviet defenses. Stronger though the latter had been, a new Soviet front south of Kiev was broken by the end of July, and in the next fortnight, the Germans swept down to the Black Sea mouths of the Bug and the Dnieper rivers to converge with Romania's simultaneous offensive. Kleist was then ordered to wheel northward from central Ukraine and Guderian, southward from Smolensk for a pincer movement around the Soviet forces behind Kiev. And by the end of September, the claws of the encircling movement had caught 520,000 men. These gigantic encirclements were partly the fault of the inept Soviet high commanders, as you said before, and partially the fault of Stalin, who, as a commander-in-chief, stubbornly overrode the advance of his generals and ordered his armies to stand and fight instead of allowing them to retreat eastward and regroup in preparation for the counteroffensive. As winter approached, Hitler stopped Lieb's northward drive on the outskirts of Leningrad. He ordered Rundstedt and Kleist, however, to press on from the Dnieper toward the Don and the Caucasus. Bock, however, was to resume the advance to Moscow. Now, Bock's renewed advance began on October 2nd, 1941. The prospects looked bright when Bock's armies brought off a great encirclement around Vyazma, if I pronounce that correctly. I don't know how it's pronounced, where 600,000 more Soviet troops were captured. That left the Germans momentarily in an almost clear path to Moscow. But the Vyazma battle was not completed until late October, where the German troops were tired. The country became a morass, and the weather got worse. The fresh Soviet forces appeared in the German path, and they plodded slowly forward. Some of the German generals wanted to break off the offensive and to take up a suitable winter line. But Bock wanted to press on, believing that the Soviets were on the verge of collapse, while Brauchitsch and Halder tended to agree with his view. As that also accorded with Hitler's desire, he made no objection. The temptation of Moscow, now closed in front of their eyes, was too great for any of the topmost leaders to resist. So December 2nd, a further effort was launched, and some German detachment penetrated into the suburbs of Moscow. However, the advance as a whole was held up in the forests covering the capital. The stemming of this last phase of the Great German Offensive was partly due to the effects of the Russian winter, the sub-zero temperatures of which were the most severe in several decades. Actually, it was one of the worst winters that they actually ever had.
Just their luck.
So in October and November, a wave of frostbite cases had decimated the ill-clad German troops, for whom provisions of the winter clothing had not been made, while the icy cold paralyzed Germans and in the mechanized transport, tanks, artillery, and aircraft. The Soviets, by contrast, were well clad and tended to fight more effectively in the winter than did the Germans. But by this time, the German casualties had mounted to levels that were unheard of in the campaign against France and the Balkans. And by November, the Germans had suffered about 730 casualties. That's almost three quarter of a million troops that were 750,000 casualties. That's a lot of bodies.
Yep.
And probably a lot of them probably died due to the winter as well. Probably were more susceptible to the cold, so probably died of hypothermia and frostbite as well. So in the south, Kleist had already reached Rostov-na-Dono gateway to the Caucasus on November 22nd, but had exhausted his tank fuel in doing so. So Rundstedt, seeing the place to be untenable, wanted to evacuate, but it was overruled by Hitler. A Soviet counteroffensive recaptured Rostov on November 28th, and Rundstedt was relieved of his command 4 days later. But it was probably still stuck in Russia. So being relieved or not, you're still buggered. As the German drive against Moscow slackened, the Soviet commander on the Moscow front, General Georgy Konstantinovich Zhukov, on December 6th, inaugurated the first great counteroffensive with strokes against Boks right in the Elets and Tula sectors south of Moscow, and against his center in the Klin and Kalinin, now Tver, sectors of the northwest. Levies of Siberian troops who were extremely effective fighters in the cold weather were used for these offensives. There followed a blow at the German left in the Velikiye Luki sector, and the counteroffensive, which soon took the form of a triple convergence towards Smolensk, was sustained through the winter of 1941 to 42. And Operation Barbarossa had begun to miscarry in August 1941. Essentially, it was a failure. Its failure was patterned when the Soviet counteroffensive started. So, but what thing is, when they brought to a halt in the winter, essentially the Russians started, with all the factories and everything that they moved as well, were able to start knocking out more tanks, as well as more weapons and everything else to arm their troops with. Because during that period, a lot of Soviet soldiers didn't even have a weapon like a rifle, or it wasn't enough ammunition to go around, and that's where this I suppose moving this factories really changed the outcome, because then they had more people, factories closer to. Well, not because they were close to Moscow, but because they weren't in any danger of being attacked, and they could just produce unhindered. That they were able to produce more equipment for the Soviet troops.
Well,
And I said,
that and Lend-Lease helped a little bit. Just a tad. The biggest thing that happens right up into the winter is one, the Germans start running out of fuel. And not only that, but they're too spread. They're spread too far out. They're laying siege to places they don't need to be laying siege to. There's no strategic. Stalingrad and Leningrad didn't need the troops assigned to them that they had, but they needed to be taken for reasons. And they would have been much better off to go straight for the Caucasus and leave Moscow. Because if they would have gone straight for the Caucasus instead of going for Moscow, they would have gotten all the oil. And then in the spring, they would have been able to launch a full offensive, and there wouldn't have been a lot stopping them. But, politics.
I mean, personally, I would have thought, to be honest, they would have waited. I think they should have waited past the winter and then gone into Russia, as it sort of started getting warmer, rather than going in when it was warm and it started going colder. But as I said, they needed the oil and they needed the resources of the Russian. Plus, they wanted to expand. As I said, Hitler had been screaming quite some time, "We need breathing room," and they wanted to Lebensplatz, living room.
Living room was an excuse. You have to remember that a war between Russia and Germany was going to happen one way or another. It was going to happen. There was no way that's why when in 39, when Stalin and Hitler signed their peace pact, it was such a shock, because what you have to remember is all throughout the buildup of the the Hitler's party gaining power, there were brawls in the streets between them and the communists.
Hmm.
Communists were public enemy number one. Above all anyone else, they were public enemy number one. The brown shirts and the communists had open battles in Berlin
Hmm.
all the way up until he gets voted into office, and then some. The
Yeah.
Reichstag, the fire at the Reichstag
Blamed
was
on
blamed
communists.
on the communists,
I know
right?
that story. Yeah.
So, Jewish conspirators and the communists, because they were the big bad of all big bads. And in every speech, it was, we have to rid the world of these idiots. And so for all of a sudden, now they're buddies. This didn't make sense. So they knew at some point, like even Stalin knew at some point,
Hitler
his
was.
army was going to go against Germany at one point or another. This was going to happen. It was just a matter of when.
Yeah.
And as far as Stalin was concerned, he would not make the same mistake that Germany made in World War I, which was to have a war on two fronts.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as far as he was concerned, until Britain fell, he was safe.
Hmm.
That they would not turn east until after Britain had fell. So either a peace treaty or a ceasefire or a whatever, that side needed to be taken care of first, which is why Stalin was reportedly very pissed when France fell as fast as it did. It was not Stalin's most happiest day of his life.
No.
Aw.
But let's face it. Well, then again, I mean, even the First World War. In the First World War, France fell pretty easily to the Germans. I don't know. France never really put much of
France
resistance.
didn't really fall in World War One. In World War One, they made it so far and then they stopped. And then, really, what ends up happening is you end up having a line in the sand that never moves for 4 years.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And the Russians end up, well, their royal family end up going bye-bye. And, the communists take over, and then they go, well, we're too busy fighting amongst each other. We can't fight you no more. Where's that peace treaty you wanted? Here, let me sign that.
Yeah.
Now, piss off. We have to get this dealt with. Which is really sketchy, because in order for this to happen, and now I'm really going off topic, but in order for the communist movement to take hold, they needed Lenin.
Hmm.
Lenin was in the United States. And then he got smuggled out of the United States over to in through Europe, through Germany, into Russia. Well, the motivations between of Russia wanting, or of Germany wanting Lenin to get through, made sense,
Hmm.
because Lenin gets through, they do their hostile takeover, and yada yada yada. They leave the war, and then they don't have a war on two fronts anymore. Why the United States exactly allowed that to happen, we're not exactly sure to this day. But details.
Well, yeah.
More useless information. But
Yeah.
Barbarossa on paper made sense. Because it was a ticking time bomb. Because not only was it evident that eventually Russia and Germany were going to go to war, the other thing that was very evident was sooner or later Churchill was going to get his way and the United States was entering the war, one way or another.
Hmm.
But the United States in 41 was not ready for war. It would not be ready for war for several years. It was a ticking clock. Germany had to get Russia out of the war before the United States was ready. He had till about late 43, early 44. And he almost did it. Giving credit where the devil, giving credit to the devil. But he had to do it when he did it, because he had to do it before the United States was ready. He had to do it before they entered the war, and he had to do it before they were ready to actually do something. I mean, if you think about it, the United States in 41 are doing military maneuvers with a truck with the word tank written on the side of it. So they were not ready to go to war yet. They were not the United States military that we know and understand today.
Or if, so we say, fortified the capital during this time, because excuse me, they disguised the Kremlin. They repainted the tops from gold to, I think, red and greens. Because the way it looks now, all these multicolored, it didn't always look like that. It looked very different. And the domes that you see on there were actually at one point gold, or the gold colored, or whether they were actually made from gold, I don't know. I don't think so. But yeah, they repainted. They also disguised it. They gave it more. They painted windows on it that didn't have window where there weren't windows. So it would confuse. So when they looked at it, oh, that's not the Kremlin. They also disguised certain buildings, like houses, like headquarters, other headquarters and that. They actually built an extra fake floor made out of wood and plywood to make it look like a 2-3 story building. So they go, oh wait, this isn't where we're meant to be. So they think they might have looked at the map and go, oh, we're in the wrong place. This is not Moscow. As well as disguising it for in case any bombers would fly over and try and bomb the area. Go, this isn't Moscow. This is a completely different area. Because the layout, the buildings look different as well.
Yeah, the Allies did that all the time, especially in Africa. They actually hired. It's a really weird story, and I'm going way off topic. But if you ever want to look into the Desert Magician in World War II, it was a guy. He was literally like one of these people that would make like an elephant disappear. That was his job. Well, he gets hired by the British military to do that shite in the desert. So yeah.
Well, one of the best stories I ever heard. This was I don't know how sure it was. This was at basic training, and our troop sergeant, who because our troop commander got promoted and he left, so our troop sergeant, Sergeant Karma, who was a big angry Fijian guy, he took over the rest of basic training for us. And this was just before the day of the pass-up parade. We were in the Nafi bar, and we were supposed to allow to have 2 beers, but he made sure that we got more beers. Because although we were only allowed to buy 2 each for ourselves, he could buy as many as he wanted. So he just so give us some money, and I'll just keep getting the beers flow. Anyway, he told a story about the Second War where they would build these sort of wide, they flatten a wide area, put these platforms down and paint it so it looked like, though, as you're flying over it, you're flying over a town. So it looked three-dimensional, as a three-dimensional illusion.
Yeah, that was part of the Houdini act. Yeah.
And the Germans kept flying over these areas and bombing the crap out of this, out of these platforms. And eventually they cottoned on and went, "This is a really good idea. We could do the same thing." So the British and the Americans found out about this, and they thought it'd be funny to fly over there. And they flew over one of these fake towns, and the Germans were watching this. Stupid Englander! They're going to fall for this. And they opened up their bay door and just dropped loads of these from a distance, what looked like bombs, were just wooden planks cut out in the shape of a bomb with the word "boom" written across them.
Yeah.
So when they saw these things hit the ground and there weren't any explosions, the Germans were not all too happy. So they went to investigate and they found these wooden cutouts saying "boom" across
Yeah,
the
yeah,
and
mind
yeah,
game.
they went
Um,
bananas.
but and I think mountains brings up uh, a very good point, and that is that um, to sum up Barbarossa in a very simple terms, if the Germans had gone into Russia with a little bit more foresight
Mm,
and uh, treated the Russian people better in the initial invasion,
mm,
the Russian people would have rose up with them. They weren't exactly impressed with Stalin at this point.
yeah,
Um,
Gee, I wonder why.
you know, they would have the because Stalin morphs himself in World War II.
mm,
Um, and about the time that this goes the other way, starts going the other way, is
yeah,
right about the time that uh, Stalin starts preaching about Mother Russia, and he
mm,
starts bringing up Lenin, and he starts bringing up Trotsky, and he starts bringing up the heroes of Russian past and how he was uh, the 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 father of Mother Russia and da 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 da
mm.
da 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 da, and he really launched uh, a
Propaganda machines.
propaganda campaign that most politicians today would cream themselves for. That turned him from one of the most hated motherfuckers on the planet to
Mm.
one of the beloved individual to the day he died,
Well,
which is just amazing.
he went as far as he had because there was a photograph of Lenin and Stalin together because
Hmm.
they used to be pals a long time ago. You know that, and there were photographs and they're roughly about the same height. But then he had his guys Photoshop this by essentially making a photograph of a slightly larger size of him, of the same picture, cut out the Stalin, and they put it on the smaller picture so he looked bigger
Well, not
than
only that,
Lenin.
but he was. There's photos out there right now of Stalin apparently in meetings and like rallies he was never at.
Mm.
Like in
Yeah.
his younger years, he was never there. But there's pictures of him there, but
Mm.
he was never there. And it's part of the revamping image of Stalin during World War II,
Definitely.
that carries on. Uh, and then, of course, as Mountains points out, the United States president dubbed uh, Stalin as Uncle Joe,
Mm.
which is just a contrast of terms. But so I'm gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna let you and Jeff promote your show that I'm sure you have to carry Jeff through.
Well,
Being a
it's hard
Oh
friend.
work.
yes,
It,
Ex-
I it's got to the point now. I mean, at first, he used to correct my my canon. That's why I'm called Nomi Omega Canon. But it's got to the point now where I have to throw him a bone once in a while, just deliberately make one wrong, just so he has something to do.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
uh-huh. Usually the one turns into two and three and four and five. And,
Well,
you
you
know,
got to be nice every once in a while. All right, so I'll let you guys promote that, and then we'll get out of here.
Yes, well, I'm Naomi Megacan, the host and creator of Equestrian Trek, and above me is my hetero man wife, Professor Brainy Specs, or Jeff Franklin, as you know him. He's the referee and scorekeeper, and we run a show called A Question of Trek. It's a Star Trek based game show. We're currently on at least 1 month's break at the moment. But yeah, by all means, please go over to the channel, Question of Trek. Check it out. Check out our cartoons, some of our other videos, theory videos, or our Ship Legacy one. There is another One dropping this week. It will soon be finished. It's Cisco's Pimpand. But the two other ones, Kirk's Babe Magnet and of course Picard's Big D, is already on the channel. So please go and check them out. And yeah, that's pretty. Also, our cartoons. Check out our awesome cartoons, voiced by, of course, the amazing Jeff Franklin, and animated by the very talented Zoe Cook Robinson.
Well, I'm not the only one that has a voice part.
Yes, but I have to big you up somehow, don't I?
I suppose so.
All right. And with that, as my co-host would say, just a quick reminder, the roundtable that was supposed to drop on last Friday will be out tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. And then this Friday will be a radio edit. I'm not sure what's going to do the radio edit, but we'll come up with something. And then we'll be back again next Monday, and we'll do it all over again. So with that, as my co-host used to say, thank you and good